Josh, my brother-in-law, gave me a good book about that. It talks about it's a prepper book, but it's taken in a lot different contexts. It just talks about like how most people will buy guns and ammo, and then and he says like, okay, well, then they'll buy a generator. He says, well, okay, well, a generator requires gas.
Yeah.
And then the gas, it goes bad.
Yeah.
So he kind of he has this idea of saying like a lot of things people invest in, they don't understand that there's upkeep and you're not gonna, it becomes unsustainable basically.
Yeah.
So it's a good book.
All right.
Yeah.
And we are live.
Live it is.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Weekly Jargon. I'm Abel Perez.
Jose Rodriguez.
Rohi Zachariah.
And we are here on the Weekly Jargon. You just heard Rohi's sharing a little bit of information about just bartering and trade and the idea of survival during an economic crisis, right? And so, gentlemen, you guys want to touch on what we're talking today and why we're talking about it?
Well, I think we've just heard some news about the Silicon Valley Bank that just kind of went out, right? So it kind of brings some questions. If this was the 16th largest bank in the country, I mean, what got it to that point, and could this happen to other banks? Now, my understanding was that this bank catered to many venture capitalists, big businesses. I don't know if it was individuals, but I'm sure there were certain individuals also. And the banks that we know, especially around here, because I hadn't heard about Silicon Valley Bank, to be honest with you. That's not a bank that I've heard of. We know the major banks, which are Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and then we have your local credit unions, right? But it didn't really, I don't know if it really made an impact here, but it certainly made an impact in the news because a bank of that magnitude, if it can fall, then does it have ripple effects with other banking institutions? And that's kind of to the point that we're trying to just stir a conversation on what happens, or hypothetically, if something was to happen here locally, right?
Right. And that example that that Silicon Valley Bank, I mean, it wasn't hypothetical. I mean, it actually happened where people's assets have been frozen, while they kind of sort it out. And I think that reality check that this has caused of, if something were to happen with the bank and they're holding my assets, there's going to be a time where I can't touch that stuff, right? And that gives us that gives us a lot of discomfort. And I kind of was telling you guys earlier, I have a couple people on my social media who are friends who were saying, I'm affected by this. Here locally with the Arts Council, they have their funds tied up through Rapbook, I believe it is, and that goes through Silicon Valley Bank. And so they were saying, oh, shoot, we just got this notice that our assets are frozen, and so we can't cut any checks. So that is affecting local theater. Mm-hmm. I like to call them nerds. No, I'm just kidding. My wife's all part of that. But all of our theater professionals here locally who are prepping for this summer's theater program, assets are frozen. Can't cut those checks, right? So when it starts hitting home, that's when reality starts kicking in. And so now it's like, what do we do with our money, right? We certainly don't want to create any panic or chaos or have everybody running to the bank trying to withdraw funds, because that would probably make matters even worse, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, there was a lot of talk yesterday at our place of people, kind of wondering, where do I go? What do I do? Should I pull it out? Should I just leave it? Is there concern? And being us, I mean, where we are both sit, I mean, we're surrounded by two banks. So, I joke with them, I peek my head out the window and, nope, it's still there. They haven't burned down yet, So, and I think that's the thing that's, the smaller banks that are in our area, probably a little bit less affected. And I think at the end of the day, there's going to be some fear, but I think you were talking about, Jose, about the fact that most people probably don't have a whole lot of cash in the bank to begin with to be worried about pulling it out. So
yeah, and nowadays I think since we've had bank runs back in the Great Depression, I think banks or the central banks have guaranteed, so if you have anything less than $250,000, that's insurable. So again, I don't know to the degree of how many people got affected that were part of the Silicon Valley, but like Abel says, organizations that invested their money in there obviously had people working for them, could be payroll, and that certainly had an effect there. But yeah, like you said, I don't think we're trying to create a panic. We're just trying to see hypothetically what would happen. What would you do? And maybe one of the questions that I'll pose to you guys is, if we had that issue and you couldn't touch your money, and this is something that we do on a daily basis, we're buying stuff, we're consuming, we're buying a coffee, we're going to the pump, we're going to the groceries, and all of a sudden, hey, I can't use my card. What then? I mean, but you kind of look at the psychology behind that, how we're conditioned to believe that anytime we use our card, there'll always be something on the other end to back that up. You know, whether it's a debt or whether it's money you have in your account. But what happens when that no longer works?
Yeah.
What then, right? And I think this was to Abel's point, or at least a question that I'll pose is, what would you do? And hypothetically, if you had $1,000, Rohi, Abel, what would be the 5 items that you can grab to be able to sustain? Let's say this is going to drag on for a month.
Yeah.
Hypothetically.
Yeah. Well, and this is hypothetically, this is in the situation, this is where this is what separates people who are wealthy and people who survive for the next 6, let's say 2 months, right? And it almost mirrors everyday life. So you don't need this drastic, environment or scenario for you to think this way, but we probably are more likely to, because what I'm about to say is, if you have this $1,000, you can go to the farms, the grocery store, and you can get all this supply, right? You say, okay, I need my water, I need my eggs, I need some meats, I need some salt, right? All this, all this stuff to sustain myself, and that's going to get you a month or two out, right? Or you can start thinking, okay, what can I buy that I can buy a lot of? One item or maybe 2 items, but buy a lot of and utilize that as for trade. Because I know Rohi's going to go get eggs. I know, Jose has a couple cows, right,
Yeah.
and some pigs, and so I don't need bacon, a stock full of bacon. I just need it when I need it, right? So if I buy, let's say coffee grounds, and or coffee beans, and I buy 55-gallon drums of it, right? And I just have it all in my garage. I know that I can go and take 10 gallons over to Jose and say, hey, give me 10 pounds of bacon, and we'll exchange, right? And him and his wife like to sip coffee, and that's an exchange, right?
Yeah.
Right, and so. You have that that's what I would do, right? I would find a product or something that I can kind of be the man for, right? Almost open a small business out of my garage and say, okay, this is what we're going to utilize to trade. Obviously, it would have to be a good product. Now I'm asking myself, Abel, why don't you do that now, right? why wait until those times happen, right? And I think that's part of the American dream, right? You come here. You find a niche product. Rohi, you gave an example a few shows ago, right? Your family has always pivoted and shifted with times, right? When demand for a specific item starts to wear out, we say, that's fine, let's move on, right? Let's move on and find something that is hitting and people will pay for, right? So to answer your question, through all of that, it would certainly be a product that everybody needs. I would do guns and ammunition, and I would wipe out any other guns and ammunition store in town and
go.
be better than them.
I thought you
Especially that Zach's place down the street.
I thought you were gonna say Abel's Cafe out of your garage. What about you, Rohi?
And it's tough to answer that because, again, being in business, it's hard to say that I wouldn't stay in business, but and it would depend on how long I was planning for potential disruption. Because part of it would be maybe take $1,000 and take the family, down south or up north to another country where, that their dollars are a little bit more stable, and maybe I could just ride out that way for a little while, and maybe any turmoil that happens here, or just avoid it. If the plan was to stick around, I think, for us in the Valley, especially with the last couple of months of these flooding and everything, I look around and say, well, I'm not flooded. I haven't really had a direct effect, so I haven't really been prepping. But the guys up in the mountains that are getting snowed in, they can't get to work. They've been stuck in their home for the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. They have that right mentality, So and they stocked up on food, and they stocked up on ways to stay warm and water and everything that they need to kind of survive. Maybe there is some of that bartering. I'm sure there is, because if you can't get to the store and I need some gas or some wood pellets, or I'm running a little low on meat, but I got a lot of this other thing. I'm sure that is some, going on to some degree. What you build, and this kind of came out of, again, when COVID hit. There was a small community of people that were building networks, and they were kind of coming around and saying, we were friends. Hey, Jose, like, what do you contribute to our network? And instead of just being maybe financial, like you say, well, you had avocado tree, like, to your point, is to say, like, okay, Jose, if things go bad, you're going to be our avocado guy, and Abel, you're going to be whatever, our go, whatever, that you happen to have. And we build this network, not just so that you have, you have some trust there, because again, if things get bad, I got to trust that Jose's not going to stab me and take everything I have. And, so you have that friendship network, but also establishing that if things do get bad, we can make this work. I don't have to go and buy everything I need, and we can make this work together. So,
and unfortunately, I think where we are here in the valley, or maybe in these metropolitan areas or urban areas, they're so dependent on these box stores that have all this stuff, right? You go in there, you have your card, whether it be, and in many cases, it's cards that are provided to you by the federal government, some sides the state, financial subsidies, and people depend on that. So every day that's coming through, they're going to use that at a local grocery store that provides them the nutrition they need, or at least the food that they need in order to survive the next day, right? Now, hypothetically, you mentioned something like up at the mountains, right? If something like this with a big snowstorm, they can't go out. Like you said, they do prepare. Mm-hmm. And I think during COVID, we saw this mass rush to go get toilet paper. For some reason, toilet paper... And you don't, but it took a spark for people to just kick in that instinctive thing. If I don't have toilet paper, I'm not going to be able to live. Like, why not something more important than toilet paper, right? I guess that's what we really value toilet paper.
Have you ever had a rash? Yeah. I'm just kidding.
And you have to make sure you buy baby powder with that too. But I'm just, it kind of blows my mind how people kind of react, the behavior of something of this nature that happens, and people rush to these particular items. Mm-hmm. And I asked the question hypothetically. Abel said coffee grounds. I think in your case, I think it's building that network. And I do believe that, because if I did have avocados and Abel had the pig farm or something, and you had guns, we can barter that at any given time that we feel we need to make other trades, right? And my thing would be same thing, coffee grounds, and I would really spend a lot of money on cigarettes. I don't know why, but cigarettes for some reason I think have a lot of value, because
marijuana.
Tobacco. Well, marijuana you can grow it on your own, and the problem with tobacco is that people have kind of gotten off that. Let me have a tobacco farm and start rolling my own. Back then that was very popular, but as cigarettes became very commercialized and very mainstream. I mean, there was no need for us to go grow tobacco in the backyard and try to roll up our cigarettes, right? Mm-hmm. So you buy these. But I think that if you would buy in cartons, then, obviously you can barter that for maybe, that'll be maybe a cigarette, maybe a coffee.
Well, I will say there is a little bit of science behind that, right? Because we've seen that during like depression, smoking, caffeine, the nicotine, the alcohol. Those are all substitutes for food.
Yeah.
When you're hungry, you smoke a cigarette, it does suppress
your appetite. Bit, and it's unfortunate, but I think, I know we're doing this hypothetically, and of course this is all stemmed based off of the Silicon Valley Bank, but I still feel like if something like this was to happen here, like you said earlier, I think it would really, the people here, what would their reaction be to something like this? How would they be able to manage their day-to-day, especially those that may not even have a reserve account? What would you advise them? I mean, not that we're trying to say go and do it, but do you want to have this reserve of food here? Do you want to have a stockpile of toilet paper? Do you want to have, can you do it in small increments so that you're not caught off guard? right? Do you start prepping today? And if you do, what kind of preparation do you do? Or you just say, well, I believe in this, in our system, and our system will never collapse or come to that degree of failure. But we've seen it in local banks. I think the central banks have it controlled to where if you're no longer being able to provide or you have a run on the bank, they'll freeze your assets for a moment, hopefully insure everybody else, and supply whatever money to be able to pay that out, right? I mean, we've seen that happen with Lehman Brothers. We see that happen with Merrill Lynch and all these other big institutions that fell. So is this any different? Should people be worried?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's more of going back to the business aspect is how do you benefit from this? I mean, obviously there was going to be some loss. I mean, people who had their money in the market the last couple of days took a big hit, but there's still chances to make your money. So if you and that was the kind of discussion beforehand is what do you guys think is the advice to somebody that does pull their $1,000 out? Where do they put it? Where do they stuff it? Can they make money out of it? You know.
Are you trying to make money, or are you trying to preserve the value of that?
Well, you always have to make money. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the I think where a lot of people with their financial thinking go wrong is, you know, like they pull their money out, shove it into a pillow, and realize that every moment that it's in that pillow, it's lost its value. It never has gained its value. You know, so where do you put it then? Do you put it in stocks? Do you put it in a home? Do you buy a car? Do you buy 100 pounds of coffee? I mean,
No,
you know?
and that's the. I think the majority of people though probably wouldn't know what to do with the $1,000 in their pocket, right? Because the majority of them, they see that $1,000 as their, hey, that's gonna get me to the next paycheck or get me.
Right.
So it's unfortunate they pull that out and it says, well, shoot, I've never had $1,000 that I can just spend.
Yeah.
Where do I put it? I mean, obviously you can go to the casino,
Yeah.
but I mean, you take your chances of losing it all,
Yeah.
right? Or back to what you said, you know, you go out and buy some coffee, buy some cigarettes, whatever necessities you think you'll need. But how would someone then with $1,000 be able to invest that and not be able to suffer throughout that period of time? Because if that's all they have, what immediate action can they take to be able to sustain them for like a small period?
And I think we got to be clear on the $1,000. This $1,000 is an extra $1,000, by the way, right? Because you were alluding to it. If you pull out, you only have $1,000 in your bank account. You pull that out, that money is probably already spent because you have your energy bills, you have your car payment, you have all these payments already scheduled, right? So you probably that probably has to go towards that, right? So we're talking about an extra $1,000 that you have rather than putting it in different investments. Where do you stick that, right? Another point I wanted to make was I agree about preparation, lack of preparation. We're so conditioned to be on this like autopilot like life, especially here in California, you know, where we have, you know, we know we're going to go to Costco once a week. And we know we're going to get all these items and we're guaranteed and we know about how much we're going to spend and everything's just like, we know it's going to be there, right? Because that's their job. They're going to have everything in one place and we can just go around with their cart and grab whatever we want, right? I would say people in the Midwest or South are probably a little bit more accustomed to, you know, having to go find your resources, working with your neighbors, creating kind of that, that network of people that can provide these goods and services and trade, right? You know, and that could be an actual product or it could be a service, right? You talk about people up there. I was thinking, well, shoot, man, you know, if we're only talking about investing $1,000, I could probably only get so much coffee. But if I was to invest in some tools like shovels and things like that, you know, I have 3 sons. And we could probably shovel snow for a long time, right? You know, and if you know, and those tools will last a while and give us at least a year of work, right? So anyway, I think we are kind of troubled here, where we're not used to, you know, thinking about conditions outside of what we're actually used to, right? And so I think that would be kind of a culture shock for a lot of us, and so I think preparation is key. Starting to think this way. And I know there's some people that say, oh, man, you know, I don't want to be an extremist building a survival bunker like you see, you know. But, you know, if something was to go that south, guess who's going to be sitting pretty, right? The guy with the survival bunker full of water and, you know, things like that. So I don't know. It's an interesting conversation for sure. And it could go from, we're nowhere near that. But it's fun to talk about, right? And it's fun,
Well,
to go through the hypotheticals.
I think that's what this show is about, is to be able to get that thought we have back here
Yeah.
and bring it out to light, because many times people just have it in their small conversations that they have probably amongst themselves or a friend. But hey, put it out, because I think we're thinking what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing the same. We're no different, right? So what would happen? What are the kind of advice that you would give to someone, Rohi, especially if you had an ability to your point is, if you had those $1,000 and those were not as you didn't need them as much as you needed your other money, what would you do with that? What can you invest that in, Rohi? I mean, obviously you're locked into some trades and stuff like that. Would you say, because of what the history has shown us, especially with depressions and markets that go up and down, bubbles that burst and what have you, there's a dip.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a lot of times people don't want to buy anything when there's a dip. But this is the opportunity, and I think Warren Buffett said it best, is that, while people are panicking about certain things, this is the time to invest when it's dipped down, because you buy at a very cheap deal and wait for that peak again, and you've just accumulated something that or some type of wealth that others wouldn't, because they were too worried about the economy. And that's fine. Whenever there's chaos within a certain economic state, there's also opportunities for those $1,000 to grow, maybe multiply by 2 or 3, and you make yourself 2-3 times wealthier. That can put you in a better position. So if you have that additional funds, talk to a financial advisor. I'm not saying that we're sponsoring anyone specifically, but go back and inform yourself of how this trend or history or cycles have happened. In this way, you can be better informed when you do make a decision. You're not just buying something. Well, I'm going to do Robinhood. I've never had any experience with stocks, but I'm going to buy this one because everybody's talking about it in Reddit.
Yeah.
Boom. $1,000 before you know it, bam, it's gone.
Yeah.
Right? Instead, do something with companies, I think, that have been long-lasting and been proven track record of making things happen. You talk about Pepsi, for example, and I go, during these times, you're right. People somehow, they direct to these drinks that they have, right? Whether it's Pepsi, Coke, beer, whatever the case may be. But for some reason, that doesn't stop. It may be worth a bit more, but you're willing to pay that extra more just to get that experience of having a Pepsi or something. I think people will be willing to pay that, and that's why these types of investments certainly work.
Well, I think the only issue with, when you say financial advisor, I think most of those institutions won't talk to you if you're the $1,000 guy.
Yeah.
And that's where.
Well, that's why we have you, Rohi.
Yeah,
You're the $1,000 guy advisor.
Send your $1,000 check to Rohi at Cash App. Rohi's Cash App. He'll take care of it.
No, I mean, for instance, especially in the last, I've been dealing with stocks since I was 18. I like stocks. I love the fun of it. I like the research, and it goes hand in hand with liking gambling and having that fun of putting money in, hoping you make more. But in the last, I would say year and a half, one of the big things that's transitioned for me is the guy that had that $1,000 in the bank, and I got my report that says how much I made on that interest, and it was like 2 pennies. And now Robinhood, I know you said Robinhood. Robinhood's offering 4.15% on my money. I made $100 in the last 2 months, because I've obviously more than that 1,000, but I transitioned my money that instead of they literally gave me $1 for over the whole year, I've made $100, and it's not even over yet, and just taking that mentality of saying like, I don't, forget trust in the banks. I mean, Robinhood is a bank; they could fail just as much, but at least be smart with your money. And if you don't want to invest in a stock, invest in something that has at least an interest rate that's meaningful, not 0.0001%. Stocks are like gambling. So yeah, to some degree, when people would always ask me, hey, what do you invest in? What do you like? What do you do? I say, forget reading you can read all you want. I learned that a long time ago. You could read about Pepsi all you want. Oh, they're going to have this great report. Report comes out and you lose money. You're like, wait a minute. This company was promised they're going to do this, and then I lost money. Because, again, that's just how the markets work. But I think to your point, the $1,000, put it in something. If you want to pull it out of the bank, put it somewhere that's earn interest if you don't think that the system's going to completely collapse, or invest it in something, because like we were talking about with Eagle, is I think having $100 bill in your hand or having $100 of an item, I think you're still better off right now with that $100 item than your $100 in your hand. And that's, I think, where people get themselves messed up is you hear these stories like they'll dig up these, back from the Depression, they were digging up these cans of money, that people were burying because, they had to pull all their money out of the bank. They had to stick it somewhere safe, so they were burying it. And people are excited, like, I found like $5,000. And you go, well, it's $5,000 of today's money. Doesn't mean much. Where if they would have invested that $5,000 back in the 30s or 40s, it would have been 100 times that, And so that's my point to the investment is don't just holding your physical cash, whether it's gold. Gold is always great. Like you were talking about earlier, gold is always a great investment. If your $1,000, yes, we'll only buy, this little speck. So buy silver.
Yeah.
And
trade it.
And trade it
for some coffee or bean or
yeah. I mean, that's the hottest thing that came out of COVID is that they call it fractional, currency. Basically, it's bars that are made to be ripped off and traded easily.
So it's not necessarily for the people that are super wealthy, but rather, anyone can really invest in small pieces of it. And maybe if something of that nature would happen, then you can certainly barter. Now, not that we're saying that it's going to happen or anything, but if you do, I think that would be a smart investment. Diversifying and making sure that your money is protected in some way.
Yeah. We talk about the currencies being backed, backed by something, and stocks obviously backed by entire corporations or companies. That's kind of why the whole Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is scary and frustrating in its own right? I mean, almost anybody can create their own coin and try to promote it and try to get people to use it, and then it has some value, and the idea is get it to go from 0.00001 to a 1 penny, and you make tens of thousands of dollars, right? But I would certainly advise steering away from those type of get rich quick sort of things, and really applying that cash to items that are almost tangible, right? In a stock or gold or silver, those are tangible, even though they're not going to send you your gold in an envelope, right, and say, here you go, congratulations, you bought this. I mean, you could, right? You could, but probably better not to do it that way. Mm-hmm. But anyway, just I think it's a good conversation for sure. And that old, what do I do with the $1,000? And I was telling you guys earlier, my kids, we scale that back, and we say, hey, if you had $10, how many candies or what can you buy at the store and then resell, right? And I think the conversation started because you go to these soccer games out here on a Saturday or Sunday, and you'll see 8 or 9-year-old kids pulling a wagon full of treats, right, loaded with treats, and they're selling these things, and you're thinking. Some people think, some people might say, oh, where's your license? Or, oh, that kid's too young. Why is he doing that? Mm-hmm. Whereas I think, man, that kid's, he's well prepared. He's prepared for the future. He's learning how to trade. He's learning how to identify demand, purchase products that people are going to want to buy, come up with a price point that's reasonable, and that's going to capture sales, right? And I think that's obviously basic economics, basic business practices. But you take that concept and sharing with my kids, how can you make $20 out of $10? And that should be that same concept or mentality with the $1,000, right? Mm-hmm. How do I double this? How can I double it aside from going to Table Mountain and putting it on black or red, right? How do I double this by working for it, right? How do I apply it?
And that's a good point. I think with inflation now, people have seen their money kind of deteriorate, especially if you have it at home, right? So one of the things that we've uncovered over the last couple of years is how people invest in bonds and what have you. And just to kind of clarify, when people talk about bonds, they're talking about what kind of bonds. There's different types of bonds, municipal bonds, there's government bonds. But typically, I think we're talking about the U.S. bonds, right? This is the Treasury trying to raise money, and they say, hey, I'm going to sell these bonds up for the public, right? And they have to raise so much money. So that we know bonds are any instruments or debts that the U.S. government will put out there for you to purchase and hold on to until a maturity, but it's typically between 10 and 30 years. And then you have these things called notes that are typically between 2 and 10 years. And then you have your treasury bills that are from 1 year to 12 months. I'm sorry, from 1 month to 12 months. And you'll see these out there and people will want to invest. Well, right now, in case you do have $1,000, maybe something to consider because of inflation, they're making it attractive for people to put their money in bonds. And this is kind of where banks a lot of times will utilize that money that they have and they'll put it in bonds. And with bonds, depends on when you purchased it and for how long. Because in many cases, you may be able to buy these bonds, but remember that if you bought them for a long period of time, then they won't pay that out until maturity. You can sell them, but you may have to sell them at a discount because the rate may have gone up and your bond isn't worth as much as it would if you would have had something with the shorter period. Obviously, the shorter period, the more incentive there is. The longer period, you're not going to get that much. But that would be something also to consider. I'm certainly not a bond expert, but the little bit that I've learned, I think we can share that with you too. We may be able to post a link. But something you might want to consider. $1,000 might not be a lot today, but in 5 to 10 years, if you put it in the right instruments, I think, like you said, Rohi, Abel, I'm sure you can gain some value to that as well.
Yeah, in the whole bonds game.
Yeah.
I think there was an example of somebody who played that game and didn't work out too well for them, right?
No.
Silicon Valley?
Silicon Valley. I think that was them. Yeah, exactly. And this is why we're here today talking about it. I think it's important for you guys to know, at least get educated in that sense. And hopefully we can bring more of this content to you, right, Abel?
Yeah.
I mean, and really share that with you so you understand how money really works. And I think we're just barely touching the surface of how we can certainly build some wealth. I mean, and I'm not talking about billions and billions of dollars. It's doubling that $1,000 so that in a situation like this, you have something to back yourself and your family.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we want to thank you for joining us. This is the Weekly Jargon. This week we talked a little bit about the Silicon Valley Bank, almost want to call it failure, or the catastrophe that's happening with them, and obviously we used our imagination to kind of touch on what could be, and what would you do in those different scenarios. Cigarettes, coffee, sugars, all the addictive contents, right? That always never seem to go away and always seem to be a good investment, but. In all seriousness, let us know in the comments what you would do with $1,000. Do you feel that here in the Central Valley, California, we're equipped to handle a kind of a barter and trade environment? If not, tell us about your own area, wherever you're from, and are you equipped there? What would you do to survive? All right, guys, we'll catch you next time on the Weekly Jargon. Thank you for watching.